I think my ability to sort of conceptualize is rather developed, but my ability to sort of pull out and structure, that's something that I'm really focusing on now. Maybe it's different for every person, but in my experience, people do want to understand how you as the storyteller, filmmaker, director, how are you connected to the thing that you're making? Why am I doing this? What does it mean to me? And then that's the thing that I think actually is sort of the real, it's the director's statement, so to speak, that I think people go, that's what he's going after.
When I think about filmmakers who have a distinct style or tone or feeling within their work, I think about Salomon Ligthelm. It's often visceral, yet meditative, and always seems to have a human story at its core. Salomon has received numerous international awards for his narrative work, directed commercials for brands like Puma, Adidas, Ford, and Mercedes, along with music videos for artists including Justin Bieber, Skrillex, Prince, The Weeknd, and so on. In this episode, we discuss how he determines success or failure, his approach to time spent on set, and how to break your own mold. Things get philosophical as we explore the idea of having creative tendencies and what some of those are in his own work. It's a conversation that really made me evaluate my own approach to filmmaking, so I hope you enjoy this episode with director Salomon Ligthelm.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you good.
Okay, good. I got this puppy, so hopefully that works.
Oh man, yeah, you went all out. How's New York City? You still living there?
Yeah, still in New York City. It's good. It's expensive. I can tell you that much. It's become more and more expensive over the last 2-3 years. And so I still really love the city, but I'm in a zone where I want to write more. And I feel like maybe a space in nature is maybe better for that. Like New York City is such a good input city. It's not a great output city, like creative, just, needing to reflect and put out. And so it's good for inspiration. It's good to sort of take, understand people, and it's sort of an anthropological study of people. It's such a great place. But when you want to write and focus, I feel like it's actually really hard to get stuff done when you're just consumed or consuming things, intaking things. It's really hard to output. And so I vacillate even in my work between manic running around, Scorsese-like manicness, and then Malick-like quietness. But I'm in a stage of life now and I'm really trying to just slow down into writing, and I need a quieter space for that, I think.
Yeah. In doing my research for this episode, I realized that you've put a lot of work into this world. Like in terms of output, you seem very prolific. Do you feel this way?
Yeah, it's maybe sometimes it's hard to sort of see things objectively because a lot of what I see is losing pitches or projects sort of falling apart. It doesn't feel like, if I just look at commercials and music videos themselves, I don't feel like it's necessarily been all that prolific because maybe it's just the way us humans behave. Sometimes I just see the glass half empty. It's like, I didn't get that thing. I didn't get this thing. But I think if I look from the outside, I can recognize, yes, it's been busy. I have done a lot of commercials and music videos, and perhaps it's time to slow down.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, do you necessarily associate output with career success? I mean, what is that success mean?
Yeah. Well, success is they can be very deceiving terms. A couple of years ago, I did a short film project, and there was so much talk about it afterwards. Oh, you're going to develop it into a feature film. Like, I started realizing that I felt a pressure to sort of outdo that project, like just to one up that project. And it was a very sort of debilitating feeling because it was like, maybe it's like an internal pressure it was just too hard. It was just too hard. And I recognized that, and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to try and build my career in that way. I'm just going to follow my curiosity and actually try and do things that are maybe not in the eyes of outsiders, but certainly in my eyes, try and do things that are at least different, challenging me in a different way. And so if I can do that, and if I can keep sort of following my curiosity as opposed to following my ambition, then I can always be fulfilled and I can always be challenged. I think there's sort of an external and translates into the internal pressure to do this thing that gets that award. Honestly, if I did that, I would probably very soon quit, just because nothing's ever a sure bet success, or we'll get into this festival or we'll get into that festival. I'm constantly reminding myself not to sort of think that way or live that way, and to just allow the process to sort of be what dictates my interest in something. Allow the process itself to be the thing that is the most interesting, as opposed to focusing on the product and then how people deem the product.
Yeah.
I just have no control over success and failure terms. I don't.
Talking about the process, I want to get into your process a little bit, specifically on set. I know for me as a director, anytime I step on set, there are like these things I need to have done in order to feel prepared, like truly ready to make hard decisions. What are those things for you?
Baseline, I think I want to have actors that I feel like I can really work with. For me, that's a massive thing in terms of working with commercial clients and agencies. Making sure that I have malleable actors, or actors that I feel like I can get out of them what I need to get out of them. With commercials, you often need to get your storyboards in order. You want to get your locations in order. But with music videos, I don't really work with storyboards unless it's super technical. I'll just do a shot list, and then I just want to make sure that I have a shot list and also have a lot of back pocket options. Often the thing that makes me most nervous is if I walk into I'll use a commercial set as an example, but if I walk into a commercial set and I only have the storyboards and we only have time in the schedule to just do the storyboards, I feel like usually I want to get X, the storyboard X, and then I want a little bit of room to also try and get Y. Just have a little bit more time to try and get a couple of options. And why you sort of discover on set, it's like, oh, that's what I was looking for. It wasn't really what was in the storyboards. It was this other thing. I don't like to schedule 15 minutes for this one shot, 15 minutes for that one shot, 15 minutes for that one shot. Give me 2 hours. Here are the storyboard frames. There's 4 of them that we need to get, but I'm going to try and get 8, maybe 12 ways to sort of capture like 3 versions of each thing, just so I can sort of walk into the edit and find, like, I'm a very detailed person when it comes to walking in on set, knowing what I need to get, but I really love improvisation. I really love breaking a frame if it isn't working, trying something else, or the performance itself or the blocking is showing you a different angle or is unlocking something. And so, yes, I want to be prepared, but I don't want to be so prepared that I have no time to try anything else.
So you'll schedule in padding or space for improvisation or time for you to be able to play with it a little bit.
Yeah, as much as we can. Sometimes you have a 2-day shoot and you don't have that time, and it's like, okay, well, I guess we're just basically going to get the storyboards. And also, especially with commercials, you're trying to sort of navigate how open the client and agency is for that sort of finding things. And the sort of the most frustrating thing for me is if you've allotted, this often happens when people, like when first ADs, and I try and, break first ADs from thinking this way. But when a first AD allots time, it's like, this shot, you've got 15 minutes. This shot, you've got 15 minutes. Then you have no wiggle room. But if you go chunk, okay, I'm going to give myself 4 hours and I'm going to put 8 shots in those 4 hours. You have a little bit of wiggle room around that. And then it really just depends. Does a client allow you that wiggle room? Are you switching the monitor off while you're trying to get that thing and the client can't see? I mean, so much of this game is also manipulation, to get what you need to get, because sometimes what you get is they will micromanage every single little detail and you have they'll take a shot that was supposed to be, I had this one shot that was 15 minutes and we spent 3 hours and it's just tacos flipping. And then all of a sudden you're out of time, all your padding is gone. So, music videos, you get a bit more padding. Commercials, sometimes you don't. I was chatting to a friend yesterday and we were just saying how sometimes you pitch, right? And the script that you get is a B minus. And you're like, okay, I'm going to plus this, right? Like I'm going to make this an A plus, right? And so you're like, okay, great. And you write this thing and it's like, great, there it is. It's an A plus script. You hand it in. The agency goes, yeah, that's great. And you're still tweaking things. And the agency comes back, hey, they want to award it to you, but do you mind just changing this and this and this? And now it goes from an A plus back to an A. And then they award it to you. Now it's back to an A. It's not a A plus that you had written. And then you get into prep, and then let's just say for some reasons, maybe it's logistical production, or maybe it's client agency feedback as you go, you're back at a B minus, which is basically what they've given you. I'm okay. I'll fight, but as much as I can with a good energy, and I'm willing to let it go B minus, but I don't want it to go slip back below what they've even given me, and sometimes that's just internal politics. I mean, literally, it can just be internal client agency politics. They can't make their mind up. Their client and agencies may be fighting in amongst themselves. But if then you're making B minus, which is what they gave you, and they don't have their stuff organized, and now you're losing money on the job, like you're going over budget, man, that's where things get really tough.
Yeah. I mean, as someone who has, I'm sure, pitched on hundreds and hundreds of projects, when someone slides you a creative brief onto your desk or in your email inbox, what's the first thing that you usually do? What's your go-to reaction to that?
I guess I'm trying to look how much of myself can I find in it? Is there anything that moves me? Honestly, I guess that's it. Like, is there anything in it that moves me? And that's sort of the first thing. Is there anything that I perhaps haven't even done? Something like right now, I want to do a bit more in the commercial space. I want to do a bit more fashion, and I want to do a little bit more comedy, which isn't really in my reel. I'm trying to find something that challenges me or that moves me a little bit. And that can be, that's also rare in commercial sometimes. Because people only give you what you've done before.
How do you break yourself of that?
Passion projects. No one wants to take a risk on something that they can't see in the reel. And so I guess the thing that I wrestle with in my own work when it's personal, and maybe it's universal, but I'm really trying to answer the question, where do people get their value from? Because I think we're in a bit of a meaning crisis in the world at the moment. And it's weird because that stuff isn't really in my commercial work. So I sort of have to open that up in what I'm trying to do in my passion work or in the short films or feature work, so that people can go, oh, he can do that. Sometimes the industry is not, you need to sort of take their hand and lead them.
Well, speaking more on like treatments and references and pitching for a project, to you, what is the value of having a solid pitch for a project?
I think the biggest value for a solid, to have a solid pitch isn't actually, it sounds maybe even strange to say, isn't the sales part of it. I think it's for you to figure out your vision. Because I think sometimes what can happen is you can sort of, even with the way that the commercial industry can sometimes work, you can have so many people help putting something together. But if you haven't had your heart and soul into it, to the point where you really understand it, it's going to be hard to sort of make a film, an interesting, compelling film on the back end of it. And so, like, for instance, in music videos, that's often you're doing that. I certainly do that all by myself. Often it's a very sort of solitary, lonely journey. I'm pulling all the images, I'm putting the deck together, writing every single beat of the story. And that process of putting it together really helps you understand the thing that you're trying to make, more so than just writing a page full of words. Because music videos are often so visual as well. I find that it helps me, the creator, formulate and organize my ideas. And it's almost more for me than it is for anyone else. I certainly feel that way because oftentimes oftentimes for the passion work that I'm doing, for the personal work that I'm doing, like I'm just doing it for me, right? Like I'm not essentially because I fund a lot of the stuff myself, if it's the short stuff as well. I'm not really trying to get money from anywhere else. Sometimes I am, but sometimes I also, like with the short film that I did, was like that was personally funded, and I did pulled a treatment together. It helps also my teammates, my DP and everything, but it's really sort of a way for me to dig my teeth into what am I saying, and taking disparate ideas and organizing them. It's an organizing sort of principle that a treatment document for my own thoughts and for my own creative ideas.
Yeah. I mean, when you have this idea in your head and you see the potential for it, what's like one of the most important elements that you go and get to help pitch your vision to yourself and to other people?
Maybe it's different for every person, but in my experience, people do want to understand how you, as the storyteller, filmmaker, director, how are you connected to the thing that you're making? What does it mean to you?
Yeah.
And that often isn't the first thing you write. That's sort of the last thing that you write. And so the first thing that you usually do is you're finding images and you're writing your story, you're outlining that. And then it's sort of together, but then you're sort of self-investigating. Why am I doing this? What does it mean to me? And then that's the thing that I think actually is sort of the real, it's the director's statement, so to speak, that I think people go, that's what he's going after, And I think particularly for me, I grew up as a missionary kid. My parents traveled the world. Cultures really fascinate me because I've lived a pretty nomadic life, grew up in South Africa, moved to Dubai, then moved to Sydney, Australia. My parents were missionaries to Russia, to Turkey, and traveled a lot of the world. So I experienced, even just by osmosis, experienced a lot of the world through their journeys. My dad could speak fluent Russian. So my stories often sort of span the world in a way, like, I tell stories in Mexico, stories in Ukraine. And I think sometimes maybe it can seem sort of like everywhere. My stories are, they're sort of like stories from everywhere. So what's this sort of connective tissue? And I think that's where I can sort of, in the director's statement, I can inject, hey, why this story has meant a lot to me. Because I don't have a sort of a through line of, some filmmakers, they just tell stories of New York City, or they just tell the immigrant story experience. Again, like I said, sometimes my films are sci-fi, they different genres, different types of stories. And again, that maybe sounds very strange to say, because maybe you can look at the commercial work and you don't see any of those stories yet. And it's often the thing with commercials, they sort of veneers, beautiful veneers. I'm not trying to demean them, but it's just they can't really carry all that much more. But now with the stories that I'm trying to tell, it's trying to inject pieces of myself in these stories that sort of span genres and places and types of characters, but all, I guess, with a theme of human value at the core of them.
Yeah. Well, while we're on that, I think that if you spend enough time looking at a film director's body of work, you'll notice like consistencies, like visual motifs, narrative themes, the cinematography, casting, and so on. Well, I've identified like some of yours that I'd like to bring them up to you and see maybe where they come from.
I would love to know, because maybe they're invisible to me. This is very interesting.
Great. We're going to start with this one. There seems to come a time more often than not within your work where a group of people all move in the same direction. They're usually like unified in a mission or activity. It's this undeniable force, and I'm curious like what that represents to you.
I think there is such a tendency in our culture today, I spoke about that earlier. There is a sort of a hive mind thinking, and it's such a interesting visual, but it really sort of represents to me what I think is sort of the cancer of our times, which is we don't think individually anymore. Often we sort of think in groupthink, and part of the problem is algorithms. So again, what that monolith is sort of a representation of is, it's this thing. It's our phones, but it's more than the phones. It's sort of the algorithms in the phones, and it's not always the same. But I guess for the most part, it's about the inability to sort of think individually. And you'll often see sort of a character in the middle trying to sort of break that mentality. When people are willing to take the risk to sort of listen to this sort of I'm going to use esoteric words, but sort of the spiritual voice in themselves, I think there's sort of a freedom that can come out of that. There are a couple of themes that I like playing with: a group versus individual identities, ancient and modern ideas, cosmic ideas, and very, very, very terrestrial ideas. And I haven't even figured all of them out myself, but I keep being drawn to these things.
The next thing, masculine figures, sometimes shirtless, sometimes older, sometimes covered in tattoos. A strong male figure seems to appear often in your work. What do you think that is?
That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. You know what? I will say, I think it is something that my wife has challenged me on. I think the way that I thought you had to navigate the world was through being strong, was through being a strong leader, was through being maybe even physically strong. I grew up in an area in South Africa called Kempton Park on the outskirts of Johannesburg, which is very sort of industrial, sort of more rough. And maybe sort of subconsciously what I saw was the ability to sort of navigate. And again, it's very reductive, but perhaps it sort of seeps through in the work. And then the way that you have to navigate is to sort of be strong. And I feel like in some ways I never really was. I always felt like the shy kid when I grew up that never felt comfortable at the party and always needed to sort of slip out. But there was a part of me that also at the same time felt like I had to project, not necessarily strength, but competence even. And perhaps that is something that I'm trying to explore. What I really am trying to explore is that sort of harshness of trying to just survive in the world, but also having to have a soft heart underneath all of that to sort of retain your humanity.
Okay, next one. You're very good at creating this feeling of suspension, flotation. Like, I notice that obviously in people seeing subjects where they're floating and levitating, but even in the way you use atmosphere, like haze, snow, ash, rain, and so on, they talk about where you think this feeling of suspension, flotation comes from within your work.
I guess it is the yearning for the transcendent. It's sort of the yearning. I mean, it sounds so pretentious, but I think that's my life. Like I want to, and I do believe that there's something beyond ourselves that are like eternally calling us out. And I do think it's so important for people to have a relationship with things that they do not understand, because that will always be our relationship to reality. Sometimes we just don't have the data to be able to move through the world, but we can make deductions based on the way that reality works. And I think sometimes reality are encapsulated in our stories, our myths, our religions in really interesting ways. And we can discount them at our peril. But I also think sometimes they really there's keys in them about how to live, about how to have a relationship to the things that we do not understand.
This last one's a bit more of an aesthetic one. If a subject is inside, the light only seems to be coming from the outside, usually through a window with shears or a series of skylights. It's stunning every single time. And I want to know, I got to know why this seems to be your go-to approach when it comes to the lighting of your interior scenes.
Well, I guess it depends on whether it was shot in day or night. I like shooting images that feel like they have a sort of a natural contrast to them. And I like using practicals a lot. I don't like having big sources where things felt like they were lit. I like a sort of a naturalism, but I also like to sort of invite the viewer a little bit more into the frame. And I think when things are sort of like, shot on 8K and lit, 360, everything's perfectly lit. There's sort of a level of maybe mystery in that everything's coming from the screen. You can see everything clearly on the screen. And sometimes I just want to allow the audience to sort of be pulled up into the screen a little bit more. And I think sometimes when things are a little bit more not so evenly lit, you can sort of do that. But again, that's sort of just an impulse. I don't even think that's intentional. So many of these things that you're sort of mentioning, it's just naturally happening. It's not something that I'm like consciously going, oh, I want to do that,
Yeah. Going off that, as filmmakers, we have these creative tendencies.
Right.
It's a beautiful thing, right? Do you think that's something we even have say over?
I'll tell you this much. When I started, there were some thematic ideas that I just didn't want to explore because I'd mentioned to you before, I grew up in a religious household, and as a teenager, I think I sort of had a lot of shame because of it. So I would not tell people that was part of my upbringing, and I think I went through sort of a time of real reflection, perhaps even like a sort of a rock bottom, a subjective rock bottom a couple of years ago, and sort of where I found a restoration of my self-worth came from a deeply spiritual place. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to look away from sort of how I've grown up and the things that I want to explore. And I think when I look back at the work, so much of that stuff is sort of just seeped through and have become part of, all the things that we've spoken about now. Some of that work is 6-7 years old, which is much prior to when I decided I want to just speak freely, basically. And you just sort of recognize that even when you try and put blocks in, they seep out of you. And it's sort of interesting noticing that about the work.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about limitations. Do you ever feel them like within yourself when it comes to your abilities as a director? And if so, how do you deal with them?
I do feel them as a director, but I really feel them as a writer. I think my ability to sort of conceptualize is rather developed, but my ability to sort of pull out and structure, again, that's something that I'm really focusing on now, and having it organized in such a way that it's really compelling and interesting. That's maybe to myself at least, my biggest limitation.
Speaking of learning, I almost always ask this question at the end. What would the Salomon of today tell the Salomon of 10 years ago?
Be patient. Probably would be that. And then Salomon in 10 years would probably tell the same thing to Salomon now. Be patient. No, because I think in our business in 2024, you're constantly bombarded on Instagram and where you look online with other people's successes. And it's so easy to sort of get into a spin and start to compare yourself. And it's the death of your creativity when you start to do that. And to really just be patient with like the gift that has been given you, and excavate that. Do not follow the trend. These are things that I feel like I'm saying to myself. Do not follow the trend. Dig in yourself. What is there? That's the biggest thing.
This has been a production of FrameSet. Our main goal is to be a source of inspiration to filmmakers everywhere. You can see what we're about at frameset.app.